Hey everybody, welcome to your September edition of the Central Phoenix Market Update. This data is a unique set of data. This is not something you're going to get from the Cromford report. It is a whole picture look at the entirety of the Central Phoenix market. Now everybody has their different definitions of Central Phoenix. My definition is essentially for this report or for this update is south of Camelback, east of I-17, north of Lincoln, and west of the 51. So I'll post a little picture up here so you can kind of see. Now, again, some people will draw a much bigger circle for Central Phoenix. Some people might draw it a little smaller. I like to focus on this. This is kind of an area that acts in a similar fashion. The Central Phoenix market is definitely very different. If you look at a zip code map, which is typically how this data comes with a Cromford report and some of the other data aggregators. Now, Cromford is obviously, I have no disrespect for them. Their data is top notch. It follows zip codes as well as cities. The city of Phoenix is massive with several very, very large submarkets, Central Phoenix being one of them, but there are many, and each of them functions very, very differently. If you're looking at a house in Anthem, that market is not anything like the market that we have here. So that gives you an idea of the data. Now, as far as kind of an overview of what we've got going on here, it's a little bit more of the same from last month. The prices are still kind of dropping a little bit. You'll see it in the data as we get to it. We are seeing some of these statistics are looking a little bit better. Pricing is not one of them though. So if you're a buyer, you're starting to see some signs of life or maybe a light at the end of the tunnel. We also have rates dropping pretty significantly at the time of this video. But if you're a seller, and you're kind of debating on whether or not to sell, you just have to know that prices have dropped a little bit. You're not going to get what you got in 2022. But that does not mean it's not the right time for you. Everybody has their timing. And, if prices continue to drop, the prices that we have today may look great. So anyway, let's get into the data. Okay, starting off with the number of active homes, you can see that this number has dropped from a peak of about 519 to right around 436 today. This has been since the end of May. Now that's a drop of about 15%. Most of that drop has been since the beginning of June. This is a trend that we're seeing valley-wide, as well as a lot of the southern markets, the big boom markets during the COVID. A lot of sellers that were excited to hit the market at the beginning of the year has figured out that the market is not necessarily cooperating with their aspirations. And so they are staying in their homes or else renting them out. This trend has leveled off a little bit since the beginning of August, so I think that we're not headed into any sort of negative territory. And to be honest with you, there were probably more homes on the market than necessary. Buyers have plenty of choice right now, and sellers were not getting the traffic that they wanted. On to pending homes. These are the homes that are under contract right now. Gives us an idea of the activity going on in the market. This number peaked early in the spring and bottomed out towards the end of July. That is relatively typical in Phoenix. At the current pace of sale with the active and pending, we have about 5.8 months of supply on the market in Central Phoenix. Now, 6 months of supply is considered to be a balanced market, so we're just slightly below that. So while much of the valley is considered to be a buyer's market, you're going to hear that on the news quite a bit, that we're in a buyer's market. Things are much more balanced here. The situation is even better if you take out condos. Condos are struggling for a variety of reasons to get sold. So if you own a single-family home in Central Phoenix, you are in a much better position than most of the valley. Moving on to new listings, you can see that this number fluctuates quite a bit week over week, but generally speaking, we are pretty much flat. We do see a little bit of a dip there in the summer, which is pretty normal. Who wants to be hitting the market when it's 115 every day? Homes sold in the last 30 days. Now, this is a rolling 30-day snapshot of what's going on in the market. Gives us kind of a better idea of where things are going. You can see that this has basically been a pretty flat over the last 3 or 4 months. Kind of drop at the end of spring, and then it's kind of stayed pretty stable since then. Homes sold over the last 6 months. Now, this is a rolling average of what's sold over the last 6 months. This was generally on an upward trajectory throughout the year until about the end of August. We've seen it kind of level off a little bit. That is likely because the heavy activity of her spring market is probably starting to drop out of those numbers. Average price drop. Now this shows the average amount that every listing, either sold or active, has dropped its price since they listed. So it can be a sign of confidence of sellers or overconfidence of sellers, as well as potentially some adjustments in the market. You can see here that there is a pretty sizable drop in about June. That is, again, has to do with the sellers that kind of dropped out of the market. So those might have been overconfident sellers that kept dropping their price and then decided to move on. After that big drop off in the middle of the summer, we have seen things pretty much level off. Slight climb there throughout the last month and a half, 2 months, but nothing major. Average sales price over the last 30 days. Now, this graph is a little bit deceiving compared to the next graph that we're going to see. This is the rolling average price of the last 30 days. I'm going to actually fix this, I think, now that I'm looking at it in the future. But right now, we see a peak in March of around 600,000 and all the way down to just about 450,000 now. So this is a more volatile market. This could just be a sign of smaller homes that are selling while the larger ones are holding off. But you can see a definite downward trend, a pretty strong one. We're going to see that really show up in the next graph as well. Now, if you were to compare these two graphs side by side, the average sales price over the last 30 days versus this one, the average sales price over the last 6 months, this one looks like it's dramatically worse. However, the reason being that the measurements are different. So I've got to make some adjustments to this. We've seen the number we've seen the number drop quite a bit since the end of July-ish. We had a peak of about 540,000 there in mid-July, and we're down to about 505 now. So that is roughly a drop of about 6.5%. That is relatively typical for the valley as a whole. If you're a seller, you need to keep these numbers in mind as you're thinking about prices and whether or not it's the right time to sell. If you're a buyer, it's time to jump. Rates have dropped some as well. So give me a call. I'll give you my number at the end of the video. Average close price per square foot. I like to track this number, particularly in Central Phoenix, because our houses tend to be a little bit smaller, a little bit higher dollar per square foot. This number held out for much of the year, but has been dropping here recently. So even despite the size of our homes, we are seeing price per square foot drop just a little bit. Last, we have days on market, both closed and active. Usually these numbers are a mirror of each other, meaning if there's a drop in the numbers on closed, that's because we have an increase of the numbers in active, vice versa. In this case, they seem to have decoupled. I think that's probably most likely because of the drop in active listings. So people, rather than selling, they've just canceled or expired. But we don't see any major increases in these numbers, a slight increase as far as the average days on market for the active and pending, which is kind of at this point what's more interesting or more telling of what's going on with the market. There you have it, folks. As you can see, this is kind of a mixed bag of data. We do have some indicators showing that the market is stabilizing or not dropping at the rate that it was. We have some other indicators that are still continuing to decline if you're a seller, or I guess improve if you're a buyer. But if you have any interest in buying or selling your home right now, or if you have any other questions for me regarding this data, you can call me at 480-694-7643 or leave a comment here on YouTube, and I'm happy to help. Also, if you would like further updates or future updates, please like or subscribe to this channel. Any support that you can give would be much appreciated. Have a good one.